Sparta. Now, a few of you in both classes have commented on Sparta already, as if there's a whole lot of interest in Sparta. To me, folk, Sparta gives a classic example of how a society should not be run. The only thing they were interested in was soldiering. There was no philosophy, no art, no music, no travel. They discouraged all of these. Everything was, from the time you were 7 years old, I mean, even if you're a female, from the time you were 7 years old, you were taken from your parents and trained in the military arts. Yes, they even tried to toughen up and harden the girls. At the beginning, right close to Sparta, was the city-state of Messenia. Messenia was very fertile, and the Spartans came in and enslaved the Messenians and called them Helots. The Messenians were enslaved for about 200 or 300 years. Now, from time to time, Messenia would revolt, and for the first couple hundred years, they're always put down. But the inevitable happened. Messenia finally revolted and got some help from some of the neighboring Greek city-states, and Sparta had to give up Messenia. But that was, now, Messenia had a larger population than Sparta from the beginning. However, Sparta's population declined as time went on. Messenia's population got larger. And then after Messenia won a fight against Sparta, the people who had left Messenia all came back to Messenia in droves. I mean, Messenia had a lot of people who would slip off and leave and go elsewhere. Well, a lot of them came back, and then the Messenian women were apparently having several babies per woman, while the Spartan women were having few. On top of that, a big earthquake hit and killed hardly any Messenians and killed 25,000 Spartans. Eventually, Sparta got to where it was really concerned about Messenia. Messenia outnumbered them at first just 2-1, then 3-1, then 4-1. By the time it got to 5-1, Sparta could no longer win. 6-1 and 7-1. But anyway, that's jumping around in the story a little bit. But they kept the Messenians as slaves. The Messenians grew the crops that Sparta needed, which meant that the Spartans could concentrate exclusively on being one big military camp. Now, several things were to destroy Sparta. Number one, a lot of their babies who were born were exposed because they were not deemed fit to grow up. The doctor would examine them after they were a month old, and if they did not look healthy and strong. And folk, I mean, with all due respect, you cannot say who's going to be healthy and strong at 1 month old. You simply can't say who's going to make a great warrior and who isn't. But they did the same thing for the girl babies. You know, they once said we want only the best of the boy and girl babies. Then at 7, when the training started, the training was so rough that a lot of the boys died before they turned 20. Between the time they were 7 and the time they were 20, a lot of the boys died or were crippled by the training. And then between the time they were 20 and 30, several more died from their wars and from the exceedingly hard training. All this, in addition, Spartan men were not allowed to live at home with their wives until they turned 30. I mean, that is all in your book. So it's known that some Spartan men might have sneaked off from the barracks, but if they were caught, they were whipped. But all this contributed to the decline in Sparta's population, when a man could not live with his wife until after he had turned 30. So their population declined and continued to decline.
Why did Sparta do that?
The idea, okay, I'm glad the idea was to toughen them up, to make them rigorous and hard, but they were so tough that eventually it broke them instead of strengthening them.
No, I know, but why did Sparta as a civilization decide that?
They wanted to keep the Helots enslaved. That was the big motivation. Also, their other motivation was they believed that they were the ones who should rule over Greece because their system was better than everybody else's. Now that's their view, certainly not mine. But they believed that they should rule, so their goal was to conquer all of Greece. And they started off with Messenia, and the way they treated Messenia would be enough to make the rest of the Greek city-states say, hey, we don't want to come under the hegemony of Sparta. However, a lot of Greeks who were not Spartans liked the Spartan system. It seemed to solve several problems, even though in the long run it created more. Sparta never experienced a revolt among its own citizens. Never. Now, they did get to undergo several revolts among their helots, but among their own people, never. Again, because their young boys from the time they were born were just trained to, hey, you're servants of the state, you're slaves of the state, don't try to fuck the state. None of them did. Now, as for their women, the book mentions that the women would engage in athletic activities nude, and I have read where they would often dance in public squares or in the public streets, also completely nude. The purpose being to desensitize them and make them rugged and tough, and not to show any kind of emotion. And your book gives an example of a woman who had lost her son in the war, and some other woman came up to her and said, hey, aren't you sad to lose your son? And the woman goes, oh no, he was born to serve Sparta. He was born to die for Sparta. There's no higher cause I could give. I mean, that I could give and no higher cause which he could give. So I'm happy he did what the Spartans trained him to do. He did what I told him he had to do. So she expressed no sorrow. Now let me hasten to say, folks, today's psychologists will tell you this is not the way to deal with the loss of a loved one or with grief. Spartans would never show emotion, never cry in public, or never cry at all, supposedly. Now, in modern 20th century war, during World War II, General Patton saw a soldier who was crying, and he kicked the man. Patton was severely disciplined for that and sharply criticized. Patton said, "Grown soldiers don't cry." Later, Patton apologized for the incident. They asked Norman Schwarzkopf, do soldiers cry? And Norman goes, yes. He said General Lee did, and he named several generals, big name soldiers who had cried in public. Said there's nothing wrong with it. The show of emotion does not show weakness. It's a necessary part of being human. The Spartans gave up a lot of their humanity. Every young Spartan was whipped in public at least once a year, and the whippings were very painful, I mean, whether they'd done anything wrong or not. Spartan boys were given less food than they needed, fed with the instructions of any other food you get, you're expected to steal, but don't get caught. If you get caught stealing, so they're trained, steal if you can, all you can, just make sure you don't get caught. And there's a story of a Spartan boy who had caught a fox, which he was going to eat. So he saw some older Spartan men, so he stuffed the fox under his tunic. And the fox was biting at him and nibbling at him and eating up pretty, but he just stood stoically and let the fox eat at him. Finally, the men went on, and the young boy took off with the fox and later ate it. Again, you eat what you can catch, what you can find. These stories are told of Spartan bravery, Spartan fighting ability. The Spartan men did have the right to vote when they turned 30. They only voted on lesser matters. With the Spartans, we hardly have the names of any great Spartan, except for a couple. One of them was King Leonidas, I'll name later. Another one is Lycurgus. Lycurgus was their lawgiver who made up these laws that I'm talking about. Now, folk, as is the case of Zoroaster, we do not even know if Lycurgus existed. And even, hey, believe it or not, some people have said that they don't know if Jesus existed. But nevertheless, the Spartans told us that their lawgiver had lived a few hundred years before, named Lycurgus. The word, C-U-R. The word Lycurgus has in the middle of it the word cur, which is a Greek word for dog. That some people believe that Lycurgus may have been a dog. or that they set up a dog to be their lawgiver and made other laws without much regard to their own humanity. Travel abroad was discouraged. They did not allow visitors to come in, or at least it was simply frowned on. Again, no study of art or music. These things would weaken someone. No study of philosophy. Again, or mathematics. This thing would weaken someone. The whole system, folks, was designed to promote total stagnation. If the Spartans could have survived today, I can't imagine them drilling the same way they did then with swords and shields in these days of airplanes and tanks and guided missiles. I mean, at some point, they would have had to have changed their ways. I mean, again, no innovation. We fight by the same rules our great-great-grandfather fought by. We fight the same way. And inevitably, it was to lead to other city-states learning new methods of fighting, and overpowering them. Now, in Greece, their women were kept very tightly at home, with the exception of Sparta. Because the men stayed in the barracks to the time they were 30, Spartan women are known to have had more freedom than most of the other Greek women. And again, that all this much is in the book.
Spartan women did have more freedom.
They had more freedom than the other Greek women, the Greek women of other city-states. More equality, more freedom. And, well, I'll say this about 20. As time went on, Sparta passed a law that the parents had to pay for the child's military education. At first, apparently, they didn't. Well, the Spartan man had no way to earn money. I mean, you know, their food was supplied and their clothing was supplied in Messenia, which made it so very, very difficult for Spartan couples to have children. And what this did was contribute to Spartan couples practicing birth control, with the result that Spartan women, generally deprived of children, and of course would go out and become dance girls and dress in a very immodest manner, all of which, from my point of view, did not contribute to the uplifting of Spartan society.
What do you mean like birth control back then?
Birth control is as old as recorded history. I mean, I know the pill, might think is a modern invention, but there were several methods that were used before the invention of the pill, or mechanical devices. One big method was their men were not allowed to see their wives until the men turned 30. That was one obvious method of birth. All this contributed to a decline of Sparta's power. Yes?
But if they were in the camps from 7 to 30, how did they already have wives?
They married sometimes at 20 and 21, 22, 23, but even after they married, they go through a marriage ceremony, and their wife would go live in their house. The man would go live in the barracks. And sometimes the men are known to have possibly sneaked off, visited their wives, and then returned to barracks before sun. This goes on in Army life. I mean, on a personal level, I was in the National Guard for 6 years. We go to Fort Stewart, California, for summer camps. We went to California one time. We go to Fort Stewart, and a lot of the men would sneak off from camp overnight. All right, on a personal note, I did it myself. I mean, these men would come back to barracks drunk as all get out. I don't even want to describe the behavior. I was allowed to take my own car. I just slip off into the woods and sneak in my car. And one man, when I got up, the sergeant said, "Well, hey, where were you at formation?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know." And one man said, "You didn't sleep in your barracks last night." I don't know where you were, but you didn't sleep in your barracks. I didn't give an answer. Discipline was a little bit more lax, perhaps, than it should have been. Anyway, this kind of thing did go on fairly regularly, and has all down through the ages. All right. Again, the Spartans had hopes to take over Athens, and during the First Persian War, which we'll talk about probably Monday, they actually managed to lead the Greeks for a time. But then they realized, hey, we don't have the manpower to rule over all of Greece. And of course, the inevitable happened. Somebody figured out a formation that would crush their military might. And then the Helots revolted and got some help from other city-states. With the result, the Spartans, eventually they gave up soldiering and became actors. Because they saw that they could not get fed by soldiering anymore, since the Helots refused to feed and clothe them.
We're still talking about the Spartans, right?
What's that?
We're still talking about the Spartans, right?
I'm still with the Spartans, yeah.
I thought they didn't have any appreciation for like arts and music.
Oh, I'm talking about the later generation. Read about them. I mean, I have done research on it. Eventually, now, given a few hundred years, after the military might was all but wiped out, there was a few of them who were left, eventually took up acting. The few of them were left could no longer win any wars because there were few in number.
So what did they do for warfare then after that?
For the most part, they just stayed out of it. When the Germans came in, again, I'm jumping now 400 AD, 400 CE. When the Germans came in, they were suffered just like the rest of the Greek states. But they eventually they headed to the hills, and today what few of them are left in the mountains. Something else they did, that every group who has done this, by allowing their people to marry outside, they became eventually inbred. They got to where they might almost as well have been marrying their first cousin or second cousin, because they were marrying only inside the community. And if any of you know anything about inbreeding, inbreeding leads to an inferior people who are, and animals who are inferior genetically to those who have not been inbred. I mean, if I could go back and talk and say, hey, if you want to build a race of supermen, have your men go out and collect wives from Nubia or collect wives from India, and have your women go and collect husbands from Spain or from Great Britain, and bring them in and mix your gene pool, and it would create a race of the super people that you want. But the wider the more unrelated your parents are, folks, generally the bigger and brighter the offspring will be. Have any of you heard this outside of? Okay, well, a couple of you, yes. I'll have more to say about this later. Now, we're next going to talk about Athens. I'm about to have to quit. But I want to say this about Athens and Sparta. Athens and Sparta got into a conflict. And when I was a youngster, it used to remind me of what was going on between the United States and Soviet Union. With the United States being Athens and the Soviet Union being Sparta. There was one thing that was unnerving about that comparison. In the fight between Athens and Sparta, you may know, who knows who won? In the big fight, initial fight between Athens and Sparta. Anybody know, maybe you've not read that far ahead. Sparta won. Basically, that means in the fight between the U.S. and USSR, the Soviet Union, if it repeats itself, the Soviet Union will win. Again, it probably, well, we'll talk more about that later. All right, for now. Yes?
Who was the other Spartan that was like significant?
The what?
Leonidas.
Say again. Oh, King Leonidas. He was the one who helped. He was the one who fought against the Persians and lost. Now, well, he's about the only characters we're going to learn. Lycurgus, the lawgiver, who might have been King Leonidas.